You're listening to Colorado Chamber Office Hours, a podcast that explores what matters most to business. I'm your host, Ed Sealover, Vice President of Strategic Initiatives for the Colorado Chamber of Commerce and editor of the Sum and Substance. Let's get talking. Welcome back to Colorado Chamber Office Hours, the podcast that, if it's not trying to get you excited about the legislative session that's kicking off this week, is at least trying to keep you informed of what's coming. And today we are prepping for that coming 2026 session by talking with Representative Jarvis Caldwell, who will serve as Minority Leader for the State House Republicans this session for the first time. Representative Caldwell, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Ed.
Yeah, no, it's great. And normally, I'll tell you, I have the legislative leaders start off by describing their caucus's goals for the session. But I want to start this interview a different way, as I don't know that our listeners have gotten the chance to really know you yet. So tell us, how did you get to this position of leadership, and what really drives you when it comes to doing your job?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first off, thank you for asking me to do this. It's an honor to do this. So for those who don't know me, I represent northern El Paso County. So it encompasses the Air Force Academy, Monument, Colorado, Palmer Lake, Black Forest, and Falcon. And I've been in this role. I got elected in 2024, so I am a freshman legislator. And my caucus saw fit to elect me in September of this year to be the minority leader after Rose Puglisi had stepped down. And Rose is a good friend. We miss her, certainly. The big thing for me is that I'm a father. Colorado is my home now. It's not where I'm originally from. I'm originally from Florida. Most of my family's from Kentucky. And so I kind of bounce back and forth growing up between Florida and Kentucky. And so one minute I'd be at the beach and the next minute I'd be in the Appalachian Mountains. So a lot of different life experience there going back and forth growing up. But, Colorado is my home, and this is where my kids are growing up. They started school here in kindergarten. They're now in middle school. And so, if I have the ability to make a difference, that's what I'm going to do, and that's why I'm here.
Well, that's I think few people would disagree with that as your impetus there. Let's shift gears back now and look ahead to the next 120 days. And of course, the session convenes on Wednesday. You lead a caucus that controls just 22 of the 65 seats in the House. And so I really have a two-part question for you that I want to start with here. What are your priorities for the House Republicans this session? And what can you do to make sure those voices are heard?
Yeah, thanks so much. I resent just 22. It's a good 22.
It is 3 more than your predecessor came into office with.
That's right. That's right. The big thing when we talk to our constituents around Colorado is affordability. That's the number one issue, and I think you see that nationally as well. It is the most talked about issue by everybody. So you're going to see a lot of my members running bills in that realm, including myself, and energy as a part of that affordability, which I'm always happy to talk about, and I will have some legislation in line with that. And then crime is going to be a big issue. I'll be on multiple crime-related bills myself, and a lot of my members are. And the big thing about how can we get things done is we're always going to approach our colleagues across the aisle, because the reality is we are in the minority. And so if we want a bill to pass, then we have to work across the aisle and get them on board. And I know myself and many of my members, we actually are on bills, and they are bipartisan pieces of legislation that are going to address things like energy affordability, as well as crime-related issues.
And I know that's been an issue in past years, kind of a divide in the caucus, is should we work with Democrats where we can? Should we just stand hard against everything? It sounds like you're a little bit more, let's find the places where we can cross the aisle here.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, my job as a legislator is to represent my district as best as I can. And there are bills, whether they have a Democrat or Republican name on it, that we feel are good for our districts and for the state of Colorado. So how can you fight against that bill if it is good for your people? And so what I always encourage my members is, if there is a good piece of legislation that is meaningful to your district and meaningful for the people of Colorado, and it obviously meets those principles and doesn't violate the Constitution, then be on it, and support and advocate for it. Because the reality is you're going to have to vote on it one way or another. And so if it's a bill that you would vote yes on, then why wouldn't you put your name on it as well?
Now, affordability, which you mentioned, is an issue we actually hear both parties talk about prioritizing. But the more I've covered this in recent years, the more I think that Republicans and Democrats have vastly different paths to get to affordability. Am I wrong in that? And if not, what do you see as the different paths? How do you see bringing about affordability through the state government?
Yeah, I think we do have vastly kind of different approaches, because a lot of bills that we see, whether it's related to medical drug pricing, whether it's related to housing, whether it's related to energy, my colleagues across the aisle, they'll come and say, well, we're going to pass this bill because it's going to help with affordability. And what I would just point to is, well, if you look at the ranking of Colorado since the Democrats took control of all chambers and the governorship, all these bills we've passed trying to address affordability, it's gotten less affordable. So maybe let's try to do a different approach. And so I think we all have the same goals in mind, because we want things to be affordable, because we all have constituents and we all want those constituents to be able to live comfortably and have an affordable and meaningful life. But the way we get there is vastly different. But where we can find areas to agree on, that's what we're going to do.
Is there a typical way that you say you get there? And I know that's an issue by issue sense, but it seems like I've seen more trying to roll back regulations from Republicans, roll back fees. How do you believe is the blueprint for affordability?
Yeah, and it's. I think there's a misconception that Republicans are just anti all regulations, and I think if you asked any of us, we would disagree with that. It's like, hey, when I walk into a building, I want to know that there's a certain level of building requirements that it's not going to collapse on me when I walk into the building, right? And so we're not against all regulations, but I think what we're seeing over the past few years, especially with a lot of the green energy initiatives and those sorts of bills, is that it's actually driving up costs. And I'm sure your listeners, because they're very informed and educated, are aware of Common Sense Institute studies where they estimate that based off of some bills that anywhere between $6,000 and $22,000 has been added to the cost of a new build. And if you're somebody struggling, especially if you're trying to get that starter home, an extra $22,000 may make the difference on whether you can get approved for that loan or not, if you're right on the margin there. And especially for elder people on fixed incomes, adding an extra $22,000 isn't nothing. And so what I'm concerned with is the added regulations. We are the 6th most regulated state, and it's like I told the chamber last week when I was speaking with them, after this session, I hope we're not coming out as the top 5 most regulated state, and I'm certainly fearful that might be the case.
One has to have goals. Let me stick with the idea of clean energy, because I noticed that you, among the 4 legislative leaders, came out the most strongly and the most quickly after the passage of the Clean Heat Plan by the Colorado Public Utilities Commission. And for those who aren't familiar with that terminology, this is a plan that essentially says by 2050, we're going to get rid of natural gas heating homes and being used in stoves and other appliances in homes. This is a rule that Black Hills Energy recently said if we had to implement it right now, it would raise the average monthly electricity bill or the average monthly utility bill by $215. So with that lead in, what do you do about it? I mean, how do you approach those kind of ideas in general? The idea that, look, we need to cut emissions and we're going to take these big steps. And on this one specifically, are you looking to do anything to maybe repeal it or pull it back a little this session?
Well, so first off, I appreciate you bringing that up. This is something in Republican politics in general that I've really been kind of shouting from the rooftops for a while, is that Republicans have lost the environmental argument because we're just viewed as people who just, want to, destroy the land and get cheap fuel and everything. And it's like, our constituents are the people who live in the rural areas, and they actually live in the environment. It's ranchers, it's farmers, it's hunters, it's conservationists. And we all breathe air just like everybody else, right? We care about clean air. The issue that we run into is, okay, but what is a pragmatic and realistic way to get there, right? And, just flipping a switch and saying no more fossil fuels tomorrow is not realistic. We can have clean energy, a clean energy future, but you know what? Maybe it's not going to be in the next 5 years. Maybe it's going to take 15 or 20 years to get there. Let technology and innovation catch up with it, but you just can't do it on the backs of poor people. Now, I grew up in a trailer park. I grew up very poor, and I tell people all the time, if you got a utility bill and it was $10 higher than it was the month before, you better not get caught leaving that front door open, because your dad or your mom were not going to be happy about that. And that's the reality of people who are barely getting by and they're living on the margins. You're saying you want to help them with a clean energy future, but when you double or triple their utility bill when they're barely getting by already, you're not helping them. You are hurting them. Like, they're going to be fine if instead of a 5-year plan, we push it out to 10 or 15 years. The world will not end. Let's do it in a pragmatic way. And I think what you're seeing right now is the utopian idea bumping up against reality, and I think that's where we're at right now. And with the PUC, it was recommended, I think, a 22% reduction, and activist groups recommended a much higher, and it seems like the PUC tried to split the middle there. But the reality is especially for people in rural Colorado, when they're looking at getting off the natural gas, you're facing, I think, the heat pump, the average cost that I saw in some of the reporting was $18,000 to $20,000. And it's like, again, if you're living in rural Colorado, or frankly anywhere, that's not an expense most people can just afford for your green energy goals. So we can eventually get there. And people also, I'm just going to add, they don't factor in the fact that, like, when I talk to Colorado Springs utilities and they have these 2030 goals, when they're going out and they're bidding contracts on how to make this transition, these companies, it's supply and demand. The entire state is making certain demands, and it's driving up the costs overnight. And so what they was projected to cost to make the transition, a lot of times what we're realizing is actually doubled. And so that was a cost that when these bills were passed a few years ago, I don't think they factored in.
Well, I want to finish up here. Knowing you're from El Paso County, a former stomping grounds of mine, there are two issues that I think constantly come up there. One is the lack of affordability of housing, which you touched on a little bit. The other one is the lack of transportation and the lack of, the bottlenecks on the roads and getting around. Transportation is a subject that I don't think people think we've talked about enough here at the legislature in recent years. So let me open that up to you. Is this a subject, road maintenance, road expansion, that your caucus wants to hit on more this year? And if so, how do we get there?
Yeah, I mean, it's something you're going to hear me talk about a lot. And what I'd say when I go around and I speak to people is I say, do you know in 2019, the state budget, I think, was around $29 billion. The proposed budget for 2026 from the governor was $50.7 billion, I believe is what it was. I don't know the exact math off the top of my head, but you're talking a 60 or 70% increase. And what I ask people is, have your roads, have your healthcare, have your safety, have your schools gotten 50, 60, 70% better? I think the prioritization is the thing that I fight with the most. CDOT gets a $6 or $7 billion annual budget, I believe. And if I'm off about those numbers, then I'll stand corrected. But I think the question is, okay, well, how much of that budget is actually going into fixing the things that people complain about, which is a pothole? They'll say, well, hey, I've seen my fees go up on my electric bill or my whatever bill, but I still have a pothole in front of my house for the last 3 years. And so I think what they want to see is prioritization on the basic infrastructure. And so you're going to see us talk a lot about how much money the state government is spending and how horribly we rank on things like roads and other transportation areas. And so it's going to be a big conversation, I think, this year.
Minority Leader Jarvis Caldwell, leader of the Republican caucus in the Colorado House of Representatives, thank you for talking with us today.
Thanks, Ed.
That's it for our interview segment. Now let's take a quick look at what you need to know about the week ahead. Wednesday, January 14th is officially go time on the 2026 Colorado legislative session. The House and Senate will gavel in at 10 a.m. That day, you're just going to hear speeches. Speeches from the House Speaker, Senate President, House Minority Leader, Senate Minority Leader, outlining their visions for the year. These are symbolic, but they're also important because they say what they really want to do with their caucus and with their priorities this year, and it'll really give us some idea of what's ahead. Now, on Thursday, January 15th, we've got Governor Polis's 8th and final State of the State address. This one could be even more interesting. Polis's State of the State addresses, and it kicks off at 11 a.m., are typically very far-reaching. He lists out a lot of goals he wants to take care of, some that make it, some that don't. But for his final State of the State address, it should be curious to see how far he wants to reach this year. He hit some roadblocks just in dealing with his own party last year, vetoing a number of key bills, and so he'll have to take that into account when he's looking at what he wants to accomplish. Can he work with his own party? How much is he going to have to work across the aisle? What exactly does he want to get done in what could be his final legislative session? I say what could be because there's been an awful lot of special sessions, so let's not count anything out yet. But that's Thursday at 11 a.m. I mentioned on the last podcast that we typically don't see many bills going up for hearing during the first week. I don't expect that to change. Bills will begin being introduced Wednesday as soon as the speeches are done. But there's really only two committees that hold interest this week. These are committees that will be undertaking their SMART Act hearings. Now, a SMART Act hearing is essentially pulling in a state department, asking them about previous laws and how they're being implemented. On Wednesday, as soon as the speeches are done on the House floor, the joint business committees will be pulling in the Colorado Department of Labor and Employment, the Department of Regulatory Affairs, and the Office of Economic Development and International Trade, among others, to talk about those issues. And then on Friday, after the adjournment of the House floor session, which should come fairly quickly, the joint environment committees will be pulling together several state departments. They haven't actually listed the official agenda yet, to ask them about implementing environmental laws. This is a good chance for legislators to weigh in to see if what they wanted to do with their laws is being done, and it actually could provide fodder for things they may do this year if they're not getting the answers they want. The one other thing I want to mention is that this is the week when you're going to start seeing a lot of interest groups and legislators rolling out their bills via press releases or via press conferences if they really want to highlight these things. We don't know exactly what is coming yet, but I'll say keep your eye on the Sum and Substance, tsscolorado.com, is I'll be watching this closely, writing up the biggest bills that are going to matter to business and seeing what could be coming down the pike. So that's it. This week is starter week at the legislature, and we will see exactly what the tone is going to be for the next 120 days. Thanks for listening. That's all for this episode of Colorado Chamber Office Hours. Once again, I'm Ed Seelover, Vice President of Strategic Initiatives for the Colorado Chamber of Commerce and editor of the Sum and Substance. I'll keep the conversation going at tsscolorado.com, and we'll see you next time as we explore the issues that matter most to business.